Um, so Slipstream is going to be presenting today on their affordable housing pilot program called Focus on Energy. And it is, you can earn one Phius continuing ed credit. I believe yeah, here's the slide with the self-report code, and we'll flash this again at the end just so everyone gets it. Um, so yeah, let me introduce our speakers. It's Connor and Mary from Slipstream, and they're going to discuss how uh, qualified allocation plans or QAPs and utility incentive programs can support high performance Phius outcomes in affordable housing. So they're going to share their findings on the focus on energy passive building pathway in Wisconsin, and then a similar program in Northern Illinois that ComEd runs called ComEd Passive Building Pathway. And then some background on Connor. Connor is Technical Services Director at Slipstream. He has over 15 years of experience providing leadership in the development of energy efficient and sustainable buildings. His approach focuses on engagement of stakeholders and integration of technical strategies to achieve high performance outcomes. Connor's work includes managing the delivery of utility, energy efficiency programs and pilots, including ComEd's Passive Building Pathway, energy planning, new product design, and consultation to owners and design teams. And Mary Kuhn is a program manager at Slipstream. She's worked as an urban planner for the past 12 years, focusing on equitable development with marginalized communities. She managed grant funds for entrepreneurs at the city of Chicago as part of the Neighborhood Opportunity Funds, NOF. Most recently, she managed a program for the DC-based organization Open Referral that uses data standards and open source tools that make it easier to share, find, and use information about health, human, and social services. She believes strongly in the mission of the Affordable Housing New Construction Program at Slipstream and is proud to serve as program manager. So I will turn it over to Connor and Mary, and then hopefully I think we'll have some time at the end for general discussion and questions, and feel free to put any questions you may have or comments in the chat as we go along. So let me turn it over to Connor and Mary.
I'm gonna get the slides up here.
Okay.
Great. And thanks, Phil. And I'll just say, if you do have burning questions as we go through, please feel free. You can jump in. Can discuss some of that stuff. Otherwise, we can always follow up a little bit later too.
Does that look good?
Slideshow?
Don't
see it yet.
Okay.
And while Mary's pulling up the slides, for those of you who aren't familiar with Slipstream, we're a nonprofit, say based out of both Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin. Sad to leave Chicago. I see some of my friends on this call, so hi, nice to see you again. But now I'm back up in Wisconsin. We have a mission to provide climate solutions for everyone, and we do that in 4 or so different ways. We design and we implement community and utility programs, and we'll talk about a few of those during the presentation. We also carry out research on emerging technologies. And I'd say for a while, we were really viewing Phius certification as an emerging technology, and we'll talk a little bit about one of our research projects with that. We also take those learnings from our research and we try to get them out into the market through educational events, doing webinars like this. We also provide education and training for the state of Wisconsin's weatherization program. And then the last major thing we do to support our mission would be around providing financing solutions. So we run the Wisconsin PACE program, we support the Illinois PACE program, as well as several others. And then we also do on-bill financing for ComEd service territory, as well as for NYSERDA. And then lastly, we help support with technical services across various types of projects and energy planning efforts. So with that, maybe we can jump to the next slide.
Look good, Connor?
Yep, I can see it. I think
Great.
everybody else can too.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So just providing a little bit of foundational knowledge if you don't know, haven't thought about this too much on the affordable housing front. The state of Illinois ranks 25th when it comes to access and affordability of housing, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So right in the middle, not great, not the worst, but there is certainly room for improvement. And so in Illinois, for a fair market rent of 2-bedroom apartment, you would need to be making about $25 an hour to just afford that, so you're not overly burdened with the cost of housing. At the same time, minimum wage is only $13 an hour. And when we think about affordability of housing, it's really two components. It's your rent and it's your utilities. So as we're trying to balance the need for more affordable housing out there, more homes, more units being built, it's also critically important to also include long-term affordability through efficiency, low energy designs, as well as healthier homes for the folks that really need it the most. So you can go on to the next slide. A little bit of trivia. I took this photo a little while back. These two buildings are now built with the facades up. You'd probably never be able to tell really the difference of what's going on when it comes to insulation. But I'm curious, does anybody want to venture to guess which one of these two side-by-side developments in Madison is affordable housing? All right, no takers. That's okay.
Not a trick question.
What was that?
It's not a trick question, right?
It's not a trick question. It's not. Only one is. And it's the one with the continuous insulation, the zip wall system on it. The one right next to it is market rate housing. And in the state of Wisconsin, our energy code is dismal. You can still build commercial buildings without continuous insulation. The building with continuous insulation is really driven by the Qualified Allocation Plan for the state's housing authorities, low-income housing tax credit preference points, essentially. So if you're going to apply for these credits and you want to have the most competitive application, you're probably going to go through and try to meet some of that sustainability criteria and get some additional preference points. So for me, this really says, well, there's opportunity here to support affordable housing and going farther than just having a bit of continuous insulation. And at the same time, I do believe that if affordable housing, multifamily developments are able to figure out how to build these buildings cost effectively, that will start to flow more into market rate housing. And Mary will talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been trying to do in Chicagoland to make that happen around builder training and things like that. Next slide. So here are all the state qualified allocation plans for affordable housing tax credits that have some level of preference points for Phius. And so a little while back, I gave a similar presentation, and I actually had to update this to talk to you all today and color in the state of Wisconsin. It was actually really fun to be able to do that. And you can kind of see that we have a little bit of a contingent going on here in the Midwest, and that's exciting. And I think in part, it was driven by a coalition from the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, solely focused on supporting qualified allocation plans. So if you want to go to the next slide, Mary. So this working group's been around for a few years now. I think some of the folks on this call have supported the working group. And so there's several industry partners out there, as well as a lot of grassroots stakeholders and just individuals who care about housing in their community. You can go on to the next slide too. And so how this group works together is there's a dedicated core group of individuals who are tracking regional qualified allocation plan update cycles, and they're helping to manage the review and recommendation process. This group meets once a month. And once a state comes up for QAP review, Indiana's pretty active right now. We submitted some comments about a month ago. We're waiting to hear back on that. I think Wisconsin and Iowa are slated to be next. But when those states come up for comment, really we want to try to pull together a diverse set of stakeholder representation, get some local support with localized knowledge around affordable housing needs, and then start putting together some recommendations and sharing information with those housing authorities. With the ones that we've been able to talk to, it's always been a great conversation. They seem really appreciative of us explaining the different certifications out there, that the point structure should really be different, comparing something like Energy Star to something like Phius. And so we try to have those conversations and then also provide some draft recommendations with technical comparisons and getting a set of signatories. So if anyone's interested in joining this working group, we always need professionals that are willing to spend a little bit of time helping think through some of the tough questions with these. Please feel free to reach out. I can get you engaged with the right people. Yeah, so really our theory of change with all this, and kind of ties our presentation together and the work that we've been doing the last handful of years, is if we're able to get preference points within qualified allocation plans for going above and beyond just regular construction practices, and start to add in some significant incentives from utility programs, we can start to see a noticeable shift in the market when it comes to affordable housing. So here are all the utility programs right now that are providing incentives for Phius. If we've missed one, please do let us know. We also have some of the programs, I'd say, that have, Energy Star or DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes credits out there. I feel like that's been evolving a little bit more rapidly, especially with the IRA and 45L mean front center. But with Phius, right now, Slipstream is implementing two programs, one for ComEd service territory or Northern Illinois, and then we recently launched a pilot program for Focus on Energy. And so the incentive levels for these, we feel pretty good about it. On the designer development side of things, I'm sure you'd all love to see much higher incentives than maybe $4,000 a unit. But at the same time, these incentives are probably 30 times more than an incentive you'd normally get from just going through a commercial new construction program or trying to get some money back on, a heat pump widget or something like that. So we're pretty happy with what we were able to do. Talk a little bit more on the why or the how. So what are some of the key drivers behind utility energy efficiency programs? Well, the first one, the biggest one, is usually energy savings. Most programs are really mandated by the state to achieve certain kilowatt hour and therm savings goals. Right now, there's really just one state with a greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, and that's brand new for the state of Massachusetts. I think others may start to adopt that. There's a grid benefit side of things, reducing peak loads, things like that, but that's really not necessarily front and center in the conversations that we've been having with utilities around the Midwest today. Maybe a little bit more on the East and West Coast. Customer service is certainly important. Utility programs want to be serving all of their ratepayers. A lot of these programs are ratepayer funded. So on your ComEd bill, you do see some money for every kilowatt hour you use going into these programs. So I always recommend trying to take as much advantage of them as you can. But at the same time, utility programs have, historically underserved the affordable housing community. There's been a big push to increase that service, however. So in Wisconsin, for instance, when we first started talking about this, hardly any affordable housing projects were going through the statewide Focus on Energy program. There's several reasons why, depending on how those programs are structured, the timing, the level of incentives, and so on. So we feel good that we were able to start a pilot there and start to learn how to better serve those developers and design teams. Income eligible spend is another important factor. Some states are mandated to spend a certain amount of their total budget supporting income eligible customers. ComEd has some of those requirements. And that is one of the main drivers on how we're actually able to provide such high incentives for these programs. So usually, there's a certain target for kilowatt hour savings, let's say, but there's also a cost effectiveness test that has to be met on how they spend that money. Within income eligible programs, a lot of those cost effectiveness tests become waived so that we can provide more meaningful incentives to make the change happen. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention non-energy benefits. So things like improved air quality within homes. Well, it's a really important thing to be thinking about. Only 16 states right now even let any little bit of non-energy benefits be associated with those cost effectiveness tests. So it's a hard or a steep hill to climb, but we're pretty happy. We've got 2 solid pilots in the Midwest. And we're thinking about a third pilot. So we're working on a Minnesota Conservation Applied Research and Development grant funded by the Minnesota Department of Commerce with a few partners. So the University of Minnesota, Center for Sustainable Building Research, Precipitate Architects, the Center for Energy and Environment, and of course us, we're on here too. And this is a couple-year study to dive deep into really creating pathways for either a set of eco programs or efficiency programs in Minnesota, or perhaps a way to approach a statewide program. So when we look at the current multifamily developments that are Phius in Minnesota, we tracked 4 of them here. All of them have a typical, this is a modeled EUI, typical modeled EUI of about 20 to 25 kBtu per square foot, which falls in line with similar Phius projects in other climates. And this really ends up being about a 40 to 60% modeled savings compared to the typical affordable housing developments in Minnesota. And that's huge. It's really hard to get to these levels. And I'd say, the transition is starting, but utility programs are still trying to figure out how to meet ever more aggressive savings goals when all of the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff like getting rid of fluorescent lights and all that has been going away. So this really starts to get their interest that these are big opportunities for savings, even though maybe the volume to start with pilots isn't going to be a whole lot. Go on to the next slide. So here we're doubling down on really showcasing the amount of prospective savings with Phius projects. So we're looking at 3 different climate zones in the state of Minnesota. We're modeling out 3 different baseline systems, so gas, resistance, and air source heat pumps, all against typical Phius systems with air source heat pumps, and seeing an EUI savings range between 34 and 66%. So big numbers we're working with, trying to get them wide-eyed to really see the potential here. Because one of the things we have to do is ask for some pretty big incentives. Remember, I said about 30 times as much as a regular program incentive might be providing. So, and that's to help cover some of these incremental costs. We know it's a challenge, right? So here we're comparing several different studies over the past few years, different pilot programs. We're still working on getting some of our numbers for the ComEd pilot published, but you can see that for the projects that have been built in Minnesota, we're seeing about a 17 to 13% cost premium. And when you compare that right to the next one, the Mass CEC pilot, which was really successful and helped build a framework for our Focus on Energy pilot, it's quite a bit more. It's more than double on average, right? And you know, we're seeing a similar kind of concern when we're working in Wisconsin. And I think some of this really comes into the bar of performance where, you know, typical construction is in the state of Massachusetts is actually quite high compared to, say, in Wisconsin, where you don't need continuous insulation on your buildings. And now you're asking someone to build a, you know, a Phius building. That's a pretty big rung on the ladder to step up. And so that delta between business as usual and these high performance buildings is quite a bit smaller in Massachusetts than it is in Wisconsin or than it is in Minnesota. So I think that's why we're seeing, you know, such high cost premiums. Both these states were early adopters, but it's a challenge we've got to work through. So we've got quite a lot of interview synthesis from this study. So we reached out to just under 60 stakeholders. We had in-depth conversations with about half of them. So affordable housing developers to builders to market rate developers, code officials, in terms of these conversations. Put a couple in here for you. That were a bit interesting. So the question of what makes up the overall cost increase that people are seeing or perceiving. Number one thing was HVAC systems. So ERVs, high efficiency cooling, heating. You know, when I kind of scratched my head at this because just a little incremental increase in high efficiency equipment shouldn't be driving the cost. But perhaps it's really driven from the ventilation requirements at the end of the day. Having balanced ventilation is fantastic. Within our ComEd Affordable Housing Program, it's been a challenge to require balanced ventilation. So we've created some workarounds, but still really trying to push the industry to do more than what they normally would. And that has come back as a sticking point on several occasions of just really ducting ventilation systems can be quite expensive. Insulation, framing is next, and then windows, air sealing, and then finally appliances. That would, yeah. In terms of ways that teams can reduce cost savings, so the old trick of being able to downsize your HVAC systems, probably really trying to make these systems simple. That's a big takeaway from me in terms of reviewing the designs of many Phius projects across a few different states. Simplification of building form is a big one. And yeah, you can go on to the next one. So there's a few ways we can do this. But I think overall, it's just really about building familiarity after the first project, as I think many of you know. So I'll bring up an old gem. Phil told me we had to present on this if we were gonna talk to the group today. And that's the Tierra Linda project. So we started the ComEd multifamily program, which I think is about at the level of like a DOE zero energy ready home for the most part, a little bit above in some areas, back in 2016. And a few years ago now, the Tier Linda project applied to be part of the program. We realized all the great stuff they're trying to do, and that it would actually make a great research project. So here's the Tier Linda 6 flat, and then just down the street, there was another 6 flat that was designed to Energy Star performance. So I'll hit some of the highlights, and I'll say, if you want the full like 90-page report, it's got a lot of gems in it. You do have to go through and ask ComEd for permissions for that report, but I can get you the link or put you in contact if you do want access to that. So yeah, why don't we go to the next slide? All right, so I'll hit the big highlights, at least from my point of view. So this is compared to Energy Star, already a pretty good building. We saw a 42% reduction in heating load. And when we started to really pare back and look at the heating load in the building, and by the way, I don't know, I think we took tens of thousands of data points modeling these two buildings. So one of our deepest dive kind of research projects in recent history. We started to understand, well, where is that savings coming from? So it's reducing air leakage and adding ERVs. We couldn't really decouple those because of how ventilation was working in the building. But if you think back to that previous slide I showed, this is one of the most expensive areas, right, that people are perceiving. But it's also one of the most important in terms of getting that heating load savings. Then there's upgrading windows. I think we're all doing a lot better on being able to select high performance, low cost windows. And I think Phius has a lot to do with that within the market. And then kind of the rest of the 20% or so of savings is coming from more of those conventional insulation elements. So a 36% reduction in total energy, and that's compared back to Energy Star and normalized as well. So this wasn't just like, what was the total kilowatt hours at the end for both buildings? It was also normalized for weather and trying to take out some of the components of how the individual users were using their heating and cooling and appliances and all that. When we looked at the WUFI EUI, it was 21.3 versus 33.7 in that normalized case. And when you saw all those savings numbers for Minnesota, those were all modeled and all between 20 and 25 EUI. So one thing that I kind of took out of diving deep into the models and the actual energy use was the increase in actual came from a little bit on the heating side of things, but a lot on the lighting and appliance usage side. And I know WUFI and the Phius process does a lot to work on reducing loads, optimizing heating and cooling loads. But I do think that there's still opportunity to optimize lighting and appliance usage as well. Hypothetical cost savings would have been improved by from 18% all the way up to 30% by switching this site to all electric. And a big part of that had to do with the base distribution charges that People's Gas has. And I know that those have come down a little bit in the last year or two, but I still would expect a significant bump in overall operational cost savings by going with all electric. This was a heat pump building, but it did have gas water heating and I think a gas range. And then lastly, we did monitor indoor air quality over the course of a couple of years, some deep dives on kitchen hood exhaust as well. At the end of the day, if you looked at both buildings, we couldn't really say if there was a statistical meaningful difference between the two when it came to air quality. It really came down to how people were using their space, how they were cleaning their space, were they running their kitchen hoods, were they smoking it? It all really came down to the user at the end of the day. But I do think it's important to be able to empower tenants and owners with the ability to get really good air quality. And so the Phius building did have 50% more ventilation exchanges than the Energy Star property, which is how the ventilation system was set up. And it had much better humidity control in the winter time, which does support reduction in asthma rates. Okay, do I have one more slide? Nope. All right, I'll hand things over to Mary.
Unless you want to do this slide, Connor.
No, you go for it. Mary is our I'll air quote new affordable housing program manager. So take it away, Mary.
Great. So I'm going to talk about some of the pilots that we're doing now. And I think Connor mentioned the ComEd pilot that we're running. So we opened this in 2021, and we're happy that we are able to offer incentives for feasibility, for design, and of course for construction. So you can see those numbers up there, but one of the good things coming out of this is that builders are getting trained through the program. And so this will be more builders that have the Phius training out in the market. So this is the first stage of the program, the feasibility stage. So we are asking folks to submit their applications early so we can be involved in the design and provide those cost estimates. So that's something that we're looking forward to having data on and publishing later on. And then we're able to provide that incentive for this stage. Design certification, that builder is going to get the training and we help pay for that. They're going to submit their models and get their incentive. So those are both the pre-construction stages, and then this is post-construction. So they're going to, sign their incentive agreement. We verify what they've done with the project. They get their Phius certification, and then they get their check. So those are kind of the stages that the project is going through. We have 6 projects, and I don't know if Susan is on the call from Conservatory Apartments, but we've got a slide about them. And they're going to be our first one that is just finishing construction. But we've got 5 more. And I think we have 253 units. So very excited about this pilot. And it's aligned with the Illinois QAP. So there's Susan in the middle, and Dan from Slipstream staff, and also Janelle. So this is in Garfield Park. The cost premium that they're estimating is about 5 to 6%, which is in line with what Phius tells us nationally as a premium. 43 studio apartments, and it used to be vacant land. So glad that that is activated now. So goals of the program, we want to understand those cost premiums. We want to catalyze that market knowledge. Like I said, we're going to have a lot of these builders trained through the program and share best practices. We're excited to publish the case studies, and that will be in 2025, and show savings through different calculations. So I think Connor mentioned this earlier. So we have the pilot with ComEd for Phius. We also have, I guess what we call our regular affordable housing program, or AHNC. So this program, we provide technical assistance and financial incentives. These are for income eligible projects, mostly multifamily housing, but we do have some single family. We work with Habitat, and they bundle the houses that they're building, and we kind of put them together that way. I'll show you how the incentives breaks down, but it's $1 to $6 roughly a square foot. We have a standard that we use, and we serve most of the LIHTC projects in Illinois. So this is the standard that we use, and we worked with the New Buildings Institute to come up with this. The photo there is one of the projects in our program, Lawson House. I don't know if anybody's going to Deals and Donuts on Friday, but if so, I'll see you there. So that's on the cover of our standard this year. We have mandatory measures in the program. And then we have some optional measures, and I'll kind of show you how that breaks down. So we have 3 different tracks that projects can go on. We have new construction and major renovation. Those are going to have the same levels of funding. So we have the mandatory measures that are $3 a square foot, and then we have optional measures. So we try to be responsive to the market. We try to be flexible. I think we started the optional in 2022, I think, and it's been, I think almost all of our projects are doing at least one optional measure because there is funding behind it. So I think it's been pretty successful doing it this way, giving people different options, how they want to, do their projects. This is for the moderate rehab. So funding levels are a little bit lower, but this is still very important for our naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA projects. So this is up to $3.85 a square foot. And, the heat pump water heaters, that's where all the money is for the optional measures. So we have another pilot in Wisconsin that Connor mentioned before, and we are able to provide design and construction incentives for this program for zero energy ready homes and for Phius. You can see all those numbers up there. We could do up to 40 units per project. And this is a statewide program for Wisconsin. And we're still accepting applications. So if you know anybody that's working on Phius in Wisconsin, please send them our way. So we're going to be able to fund up to 100 units of income eligible for the pilot. And I don't know if I mentioned that we just started this program like in the fall or in 2023. So this is a newer program. And we want the developers to be able to leverage the IRA tax credits along with the incentives that we're offering through the program. So next steps, we want to show demand from our developer community. So please apply to our programs so we can show that, that we have demand and people want to use these programs. Provide feedback to us. Like I said, we want to be responsive and flexible with the market. And then we would also like to ask you, what information do you need from us? What's useful to you? And of course, we're going to publish information about costs and energy savings, but what else is interesting or helpful to you? And this is our vision. Connor had a similar slide before, but we'll share it again. This is our theory of change, and this is how we want to transform the market. So thank you everyone for your attention today, and look forward to hearing your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Mary and Connor. Yeah, let's open it up. See any questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to jump in, questions about Illinois or Wisconsin or any of the things we're talking about.
Otherwise, I have a question for this group. I think someone could answer it. In terms of the Milwaukee project, I'm curious, is that do you feel like that is going to get Phius certified, or is it still on the fence? Like, I haven't been able to keep that close a tab on that project, and I'm trying to think of how we might be able to leverage that for the Focus on Energy program, at least. Trying to get more folks thinking about Phius buildings in Wisconsin. So right now we're kind of some DOE zero energy ready. People are feeling okay with that, but the leap to Phius is a tough one in Wisconsin right now.
I think Tony said the timber tower, question mark.
Yeah, the timber tower. I'll send you an email, Tony, if you know about it. I can keep going with questions. I can.
Not familiar with
That's
that.
true. I should come in May. I'm curious. Not to put you on the spot, Tom, but how's it been working through the ComEd program? Any tips for the other CPHCs and folks on the call?
Well, it hasn't been too much work really on my end. You do have us do a ComEd baseline model, but you get pretty good guidance because you use the actual Phius review form as kind of a format for how you make changes from your model that you established to ComEd baseline. So it is really set up to work well as a CPHC on it. So I haven't found it, it's actually, I've for the most part just done the model of yes, sent it off to you and don't hear anything back. So I actually like that.
How to keep it streamlined, yeah.
Yeah, so once we've got our project certification going, the kind of ComEd baseline part of it has not been a problem. And it's useful to have that model in our hands anyway, so we can kind of do our own kind of comparison and, when we have to tell that story too. One of the kind of questions I had about yours, because one of the big discussions that, I don't know if you attended the presentation we did, Susan and I, for the Illinois Green Alliance. Mary was in our panel discussion, but we also did one before that, which was more of a presentation, the two of us. And one of the big topics that we kind of talked about was the EUIs of these projects and how variable they are in terms of the mix of unit types. Conservatory was all single room occupancy, which really, really drove the EUI way up. I mean, it was in the 30s still. And that's because you've got 45 CFM minimum for one person, but you need that for your bathroom and kitchen exhaust. So it really, really drove the energy use up. Plus you have, same refrigerator in the one bedroom, the single room as you would in the 3-bedroom. So I was, I looked at the slide you showed with the EUIs and said, those are pretty darn good. And it's like, how did you reach those? But it would be good to know kind of the mix of units in some of these ones that you're benchmarking, because it does make a tremendous difference. It's easier to hit them with all 2 and 3 bedrooms than it is with single room occupancies.
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of how we report out, I think we should definitely talk about density, as we're talking both about
like
energy and cost.
An EUI, which is per square foot, and energy use intensity expressed as a per person kind of thing.
Yeah. I'll just say, as program administrators, we do like the really dense buildings, because the energy savings also is magnified with the density, right? So we're able to.
You want small units, yeah.
But
sorry,
it kind of it works nice in a mix, right? In the mix of the housing that's needed, so that on average the programs can perform pretty well in terms of incentive dollars per kilowatt hour saved and goals met by the utilities by having some denser projects in, certainly.
Denser in the terms of square foot per person, smaller.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that actually went higher when you do the single room occupancy. It actually goes up because you get the whole unit as one person in it. So it was not a very dense. The density goes down. I mean, it was not a very dense project, but energy dense, but not people dense. But yeah, the programs
I guess
to work with.
Is this group, so there was there's a big push by like C40 and City of Chicago to really spend some money on affordable housing developments, and a lot of those developments are working through the programs and have high aspirations for certifications. I'm curious what you all might think is next. Do you think that the 7 Phius projects in Chicagoland area is gonna be enough to get that kind of ball rolling down the hill, that momentum really building? Or do you think that another kind of shot in the arm is needed with more funding, little competitions and things like that? I mean, I'd love it. I think it'll help. It'll certainly help. We'll have 6 builders trained, more experience in the design community, more developers probably feeling comfortable with it too. But yeah, I'm wondering, is there, what can we do in kind of our role supporting utilities to help? Or
Connor and Mary, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the outreach to those developers on just really getting the word out on, there are so many pieces of the incentive puzzle to put together. And, that in itself is a bit intimidating apart from the, different construction process. So, and just the project delivery itself. So
yeah,
now that you have this awesome program and foundation, what does that outreach look like to those developers?
I can start with what's freshest in my mind, and maybe a little point of context with trying to grow the program in Wisconsin. So we have been doing pretty heavy outreach in the state of Wisconsin around the pilot. And that's where we've kind of run into the issue or have come to the conclusion that Phius might be too big of a leap for many, and to try to work through these foundational steps. At the same time, also talking about, the being able to take on 45L tax credits. Phius is going to work for, the DOE tax credits as well. And I think we can try to build on some of the momentum that we have, reaching about 70% of the LIHTC market in Northern Illinois with the regular program, to start to link them to these higher performance buildings. It's a much easier conversation to say, hey, we've got some more money available to you. You can take credit for these, additional IRA opportunities. But I think it's going to be a little bit slow going. I mean, we do have, the nice thing is our program's recognized now, and we have made a push, or we did make a push when we first launched the Phius pilot, to basically everybody who's been working with us, to try to, see who might be interested. And I think after this kind of first cohort now, trying to reinvigorate those conversations is certainly on the table, and a good pathway forward. But while we're doing that, we're going to get questions around, well, how do we make this happen? I mean, there's this community here, certainly, really strong CPHC community in Chicago, and really trying to link back. Maybe there's an opportunity to try to do a bit of a co-presentation or something like that on some of the Phius fundamentals back to this developer community. And I know we did some presentations at the last IDA conference and kind of talked about this a bit. So we're trying to cast a fairly wide net, Curtis, in terms of what we're doing for tactics here. And maybe part of that could be trying to think about a timing on a webinar or something, because I'm a little worried that the pipeline for all this additional funding is kind of dried up. That the projects apply. There were certainly some projects that were seeking Phius to not necessarily get the ComEd funding, but so that they could go after some of these larger kind of grant programs out there, right? And so we want to make sure that people are still seeing a pathway for Phius to be cost effective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking the question as a means of support as well. And when you mention that, I mean, there is a business case or business opportunity for some of these experts to be able to present those ideas and that learning as well. So another opportunity to collaborate. So thanks, Connor.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just in the chat, I just posted the continuing ed credit again for anybody who might be looking for that. And yeah, I don't see any other questions. Should we wrap up for the evening? Okay, thanks Connor and Mary for your time. It's always cool to see what Slipstream's up to. You're a really important partner to the passive building movement. So thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to chat.
Okay.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Good
Have
night.
a good night.
Thanks. Bye.